Have you been keeping up with the recent developments in Russia's economic crisis? The West's imposition of price caps on Russian oil revenue has had a significant impact, causing Russia's oil revenue to decline and leading to difficulties for Russians accessing cash from ATMs. In response, Putin launched an attack on Ukraine and announced new sanctions. But it seems the price caps have been effective in limiting Russia's ability to finance the war. However, the caps are not a long-term solution to the complex geopolitical issues surrounding the global oil industry. In this video, we'll dive into the details of the price caps, their effectiveness, and what this means for the future of the global oil market. So stick around until the end to learn about the proposed additional price caps and how Russia may react to them. Let's get started. When sanctions were imposed, this trade came to a halt, with many countries deciding to stop buying energy from Russia. European countries that relied heavily on Russian oil announced plans to phase out these purchases as well. These sanctions also led to the freezing of Russian reserves in foreign countries, depriving the Russian government of access to billions of dollars. Russian banks were also removed from the SWIFT network, which effectively cut off their ability to conduct international business. Although the events unfolded rapidly, the consequences of the imposed sanctions were not immediate. These sanctions, often referred to as economic weapons, differ greatly from traditional weapons used in military conflicts. In contrast to a missile which delivers a swift and decisive blow, sanctions have a delayed impact and seldom harm the decision-makers responsible for their implementation. It was ultimately Putin who made the decision to initiate the war. There is video evidence featuring youthful Russian soldiers that indicates that a few of them may not have been cognizant of the fact that their actions involved attacking Ukraine, as they were simply following orders. Regardless, the repercussions of this contention are probably not going to straightforwardly affect Putin, as the common residents of Russia will endure the worst part of the outcomes. This includes individuals who have lost their means of employment and income due to these sanctions, leading to the closure of factories and stores. These sanctions had a significant impact on the oligarchs and officials in Russia. Their financial balances were frozen. Their rich resources, for example, yachts and personal luxury planes, were seized, and their assets were repossessed. The cumulative financial loss of these sanctions was estimated to be close to $100 billion. Despite these efforts, it soon became clear that Putin was prepared to weather the storm of these sanctions. It has been noted that since 2017, Putin has been accumulating a sizable war chest from the sales of oil, which some experts estimate may be sufficient to support the war until the end of 2023. Moreover, upon the commencement of the invasion, the cost of oil surged to the highest levels of the previous year, and it remained relatively high for a significant portion of 2022. This enabled Russia to generate a record amount of income, which helped finance both its economy and the ongoing war. The resilience of oil demand and the record high oil prices served to offset some of the negative effects of the sanctions. Given that Europe was the primary recipient of Russian energy, it was decided to implement a strategy to phase out Russian energy purchases by December 2022. Additionally, the G7 and Australia agreed to set a price cap on Russian oil to limit its revenue around the same time. Pushing ahead, it is not yet clear how actually this value cap will be authorized, and whether it will have the ideal impact of stopping the contention between Russia and different countries. However, it is clear that the implementation of this cap represents a significant step towards addressing the complex geopolitical issues surrounding the global oil industry. An oil price hike at this point could spell disaster for these countries and their populations, with potentially dire consequences. To address this issue, the G7 proposed a solution that would ensure that Russia's oil remains available on the market without Russia benefiting financially from these sales. This solution came in the form of a price cap. While implementing this cap presents some challenges, it is essential to first understand the significance of selecting the right price. Certain guidelines must be followed when establishing a price cap to ensure success. To begin with, the price cannot be set so low that the vendor has no motivation to sell their product. For instance, if the price cap for Russian oil were lower than the cost of production, Russia would stop producing oil altogether to avoid making losses. Also, the price cap can't be set high to the point that it genuinely affects the market. Thus, setting a price cap of $100 when oil is trading at $80 would be futile. Taking these considerations into account, the G7 agreed on a price cap of $60 per barrel for Russian oil. Experts estimate that it costs Russia around $40 to produce a barrel of oil. Therefore, the $60 price cap ensures that there is still a profit to be made by producing and selling Russian oil. The enforcement of such a cap presents a different challenge altogether. especially when Russia and China are conducting business in the oil trade. Considering that the connection between the West and China has been stressed recently, it's not plausible for the West to direct China's adherence to the guidelines. It's not only China. Numerous other nations are happy to purchase Russian oil. It's worth noting that most Western nations have already ceased buying oil from Russia. As a result, how do you persuade so many other countries to abide by the price cap? The potency of insurance and the shipping fleet becomes vital in this scenario. Western governments have made it illegal for Western companies to engage in business with Russian oil unless the price cap of $60 is adhered to. This implies that Western ships cannot transport Russian oil without the appropriate documents certifying that the price cap is being observed. This measure prevents Russia from using Western shipping companies. But it is possible that they could turn to alternative options, right? However, this assumption is incorrect. The shipping ecosystem relies heavily on insurance, and without proper documentation, ships cannot sail, dock at ports, or enter canals. Fortunately, the West controls 99% of the shipping insurance market, which means that any ship, regardless of its country of origin, must demonstrate that it adheres to the price cap to obtain insurance. This makes it highly likely that even if Russia were to sell oil to China or India, the price would still be below the cap. Since the implementation of the price cap on December 3rd last year, data has been collected to evaluate its effectiveness. Additionally, we will discuss Russia's response to the cap. As soon as the price cap was announced, Putin declared that any country that agreed to it would be prohibited from buying Russian oil starting February 1st. This decision is puzzling because countries that have agreed to the price cap have already ceased purchasing Russian oil. This is precisely why the shipping and insurance companies were utilized to implement the price cap, as other countries would follow suit. It's like being banned from attending the Super Bowl and then announcing that you will never attend it again. The good news is that the price cap has been quite successful. Assuming we analyze the diagrams, we can see that Russian oil has exchanged at beneath $60 per barrel for most of the time, since the cap was set up on December 3rd. There were reports that Russia was attempting to establish its own insurance and shipping networks to continue selling its oil, but none of these efforts seem to have succeeded. Furthermore, Putin was counting on China and India to compensate for the demand that vanished after Europe stopped purchasing Russian energy, which has not materialized. Recalling a notable geopolitics quote, "There are no permanent friends in geopolitics, only permanent interests," seems fitting for the current situation. China and India have previously bought Russian oil because it was advantageous for them, but they swiftly seized the opportunity to take full advantage once price caps were implemented. Reports indicate that India has been purchasing even greater quantities of Russian oil at steeper discounts following the price cap, leading to a significant decrease in Russian oil export volumes and prices. It appears that the caps have been effective, but the West is not content with stopping there. Recent reports have confirmed that the G7 and European Union have proposed 2 additional price caps for Russian products. One is a $100 per barrel cap on premium products such as diesel, while the other is a $45 cap for petroleum products like fuel oil and industrial lubricant oil. Experts believe that this will cause further disruption in the market and inflict more harm on Russia. It will be intriguing to observe how Russia will react to these new price caps, and whether they will be able to circumvent them. Despite its success, the price cap strategy is not a long-term solution to the complex geopolitical issues that surround the global oil industry. Despite the fact that the caps might have made it harder for Russia to pay for the conflict, they don't fix the issues that prompted Russia's viciousness in any case. Also, as long as there is a need for oil, countries will be ready to sell it, even if the price is capped or they are put under sanctions. And a long-term solution will require an international endeavor to reduce the use of fossil fuels and transition to cleaner, more sustainable energy sources.